3 years ago, if you had told me that I would be in the situation I am now, I would have thought you were lying. At that time, I was 25 years old, and my husband was 29, and we had a 2-year-old son. When we first met, I didn't have much experience in the dating world, and I had only been intimate with 2 other men before meeting my husband. However, my husband was quite different from me in this regard. He had a reputation for being a womanizer, someone who dated multiple people at once. I even suspected that he might have a sex addiction because he hesitated to commit to a serious relationship with me. During the initial stages of our dating, I had to resort to ghosting him on several occasions to push him into making a commitment. He was seeing other people at the time and told me that I couldn't satisfy all of his soul needs if we were to be exclusive. Faced with this ultimatum, I decided to challenge him. I told him to either give our relationship a chance or move on. To my surprise, he chose to give us a try and decided to become exclusive with me. When we decided to be exclusive, our intimate life became quite active. We were having sex every day, and sometimes even twice a day. To my surprise, I discovered that I could keep up with him and satisfy his needs. It turned out that I enjoyed sex almost as much as he did. One of the reasons I hadn't been with many partners before meeting my husband was because of my religious upbringing. My beliefs had guided me to be more reserved in my romantic relationships. After I moved in with my husband, I felt incredibly happy because I believed that I had tamed him. Even his own mother mentioned that she never thought anyone could keep him in check, as he had gained a reputation for being involved with many people romantically. I took on the role of a detective to ensure that my husband wasn't being unfaithful. I placed tracking devices in his car and snooped on his social media accounts, but I found no evidence of him being unfaithful. He seemed loyal and committed. After we discovered I was pregnant, we decided to get married, and I later gave birth to our son. However, something changed in my husband after our son was born, more significantly than before. He cut his long hair, became more focused on his job, and stopped going out drinking or spending time with friends. I was genuinely proud of the positive changes he was making in his life. The only challenge was that I wasn't accustomed to this side of him because it wasn't the person I had initially married. Our soul life went through a significant decrease in frequency, going from being intimate every day to just once a week. I initially suspected that my husband might be cheating on me, but upon investigation, everything seemed to check out. He was working longer hours and making more money, which explained his increased absence at home. Strangely, during this time, my soul desire was at an all-time high, and I found myself turning to online content to satisfy my needs. Before this period, I had never engaged in such behavior, but I found myself increasingly drawn to watching and fantasizing about the things I saw online. What made it even more challenging was that the more I watched, the stronger my desires became, and they seemed insatiable. It reached a point where I started thinking about these explicit things I had seen online during intimate moments with my husband. One particular fetish that began to consume my thoughts was the idea of being intimate with multiple men simultaneously. I knew it might sound unconventional, but I couldn't stop these thoughts from dominating my mind. Even though my husband was wonderful, I began to sense that our love life was losing its spark. I found myself getting irritated by things about him that hadn't bothered me before. I realized that my soul frustration was affecting our relationship in a negative way, and I was aware of this. Since my husband and I were good at talking openly about our feelings, I decided to express my frustration to him. He made an effort to initiate more intimacy and engage in more foreplay, which was a positive step. However, during our intimate moments, I felt like his heart wasn't fully in it, like he was doing it out of obligation rather than genuine desire. We had another conversation about this issue, and he did his best to improve. But despite his efforts, it still felt like something was missing, and what he was doing wasn't enough to satisfy my needs. So, I began to assume that my life would continue on this unsatisfying path. I kept seeking satisfaction through online content to fulfill my soul desires. Then, one day, my husband came home with exciting news. He had received a promotion at work that came with more responsibilities. While most wives would be thrilled to hear that their husband was making more money, I knew what this could mean for our intimate life. Our relationship was already strained in that department, and I was concerned that it might become non-existent if he took on this new position. Although I could see how happy he was about the promotion, I didn't want to dampen his spirits. So, on the outside, I pretended to be happy for him, but inside, I was seething with frustration. To convey my concerns, I started doing little things that irritated him until he got the hint that something was bothering me, and we had to have a serious conversation. During our discussion, I admitted that I had been contemplating the idea of opening up our relationship. This idea had been influenced by the content I had been consuming online. I suggested the possibility of an open relationship, but he vehemently refused. I brought it up a couple more times, but he remained firm in his rejection of the idea. Then, one day, he came home and surprised me by saying he was open to the idea of an open relationship. This was unexpected because he had been refusing the idea for weeks. I felt curious about why he had suddenly changed his stance, but I didn't want to ask too many questions, fearing he might reconsider. By this point, I had done enough reading on successful open relationships and had borrowed some ground rules to protect the love and bond we shared while also engaging in physical relationships with others. We established some simple rules to ensure our relationship remained strong. We both agreed not to get involved with our friends or coworkers. We made a commitment to practice safe sex at all times. We decided not to bring anyone we were involved with home. Our son was to be kept separate from our open relationship activities. We pledged to keep each other informed about our plans and intentions regarding other partners. We agreed to avoid any romantic involvement with other partners, which we clearly defined as behaviors like moving in together, meeting each other's families, planning to have children together, and similar commitments. These rules were put in place to ensure that our relationship remained strong and loving, even as we explored the possibility of being with other people physically. We set up some ground rules to make sure our open relationship worked smoothly. First and foremost, we agreed that it was okay to have feelings for others, as long as we handled them maturely. We also decided that we should share our phone passwords and access to our social media accounts with each other, as a sign of trust and transparency. Lastly, we committed to sharing information about our interactions with other people. These rules seemed fair, and my husband agreed to them. We also agreed that if we ever felt the need to add more items to this list, we would discuss and modify it together. Once we had these rules in place, I decided to give it a try. I joined a dating app called Tinder and started swiping right on the most attractive guys I could find. I wanted to explore the fantasies that had been swirling in my mind for a while. At first, I was nervous when I matched with the first 3 guys, but after that, my nervousness began to fade. I went through 7 different guys before finally finding 3 who became my regulars in this new phase of our relationship. I remember the moment when I told my husband about my first experience with someone else, and I watched as he tried to act like he was okay with it. I have to admit that while the idea of having an open relationship had seemed appealing, I wanted to call it off when I saw how hurt he looked when I shared that information. However, he assured me that it was okay and that it just needed some time for him to get used to it. Gradually, I stopped telling him about the other partners I was involved with because I could see how much it was affecting him. Moreover, when I had been with 7 partners, he had only been with 2 women. To spare his feelings, I intentionally downplayed the number of guys I was seeing. However, he eventually checked my phone and realized I was lying to him. That's when the real problems began. After that, he never looked at me the same way, and our relationship became strained. I made the unilateral decision to close the open relationship because it was becoming toxic. 3 of the guys I had been seeing were pressuring me to be in a committed relationship with them, even though I had told them about my husband and son, whom I deeply loved. My husband refused to close our open relationship, and his reason was that he wanted to get even with me. He claimed that I had been with 15 partners, and he wouldn't agree to close the relationship until he had been with 15 or more women. I tried to explain to him that the 15 men were the ones I had been talking to, not necessarily those I had been intimate with, but he didn't believe me. Our relationship took a sharp downward turn from that point. He started coming home late, and we stopped being intimate altogether. I assumed he was out pursuing other women, but I later discovered that he had lost his job because he had been involved with multiple women at his workplace, and the situation had blown up in his face. When the news of his job loss reached me, it came from someone else, not him. Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he blamed me, arguing that I had introduced the idea of an open relationship. I reminded him that one of our rules had been not to engage with coworkers, but he claimed that since he was working all the time, the only women he had access to were his coworkers. From that point forward, our relationship took a turn for the worse. Even though we had decided to close the open relationship, my husband refused to touch me. Whenever we had arguments, he accused me of being tainted and claimed that he couldn't have sex with me without imagining other men. We were constantly at odds, and it felt like we were going nowhere. Our home became an incredibly toxic environment, and in the midst of this turmoil, I sought comfort in the arms of one of the men I had been involved with outside of our marriage. He seemed to fulfill the needs and desires that my husband couldn't. When I shared this with my husband, he made the decision to file for a divorce, and it was uncontested because the only significant asset we had was our home. In the end, I was granted primary custody of our son, and my husband began paying child support. Our relationship had reached a point of no return, and we went our separate ways. It didn't take me long to realize that the partner I had an affair with, the one I thought was everything I wanted, turned out to be someone quite different from what I had imagined. He seemed like the ideal person when I was still with my ex-husband, but when I moved in with him, he changed into a completely different person. To add to the complications, after we filed for divorce, my ex-husband found a better job and started dating a woman who looked remarkably similar to me. It's hard not to feel regret every time I drop off my son and see them together, living the life I thought I would have, but I let it slip away. I left the man I was with, jumped into another relationship without giving myself time to heal from the emotional toll of the divorce, and my self-confidence and self-esteem took a hit. After serial dating for 2 years, I decided to take a step back and reevaluate how I ended up in this situation. One thing I am certain of is that I wish I could turn back time and return to how things used to be. I don't understand how people in open relationships make it work, but for me, it had a devastating impact on my life and turned me into someone I don't like.